Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm delighted to open the next session about urban agriculture development trajectories on local, regional, and EU level. I know opening the first session after lunch can be a challenge since you're probably still in the process of digestion. I promise that we will provide you with some interesting food for thought. So we will stick to this food topic. A couple of words about the background of the session. Why do we want to work multi-scale, multi-level now? When we embarked on this European Forum on Urban Agriculture mission and tried to unlock the potential of urban agriculture, we immediately became aware of the fact that we need to work at the EU level. And what we did, we started to think about how is agriculture supported through EU policies, and we became aware of the fact that there's public health, there's agriculture policy involved, environment, territorial cohesion, research and innovation. So there are certainly a lot of areas of action which are related to urban agriculture, but EU policies have never been developed with the idea in mind to unlock the potential of urban agriculture. They were more modeled around the idea of provide us with food security. So we still have the feeling that urban agriculture is partly neglected on the EU level, while when we have a look at the city level, this became very apparent to me during the speeches of this morning. We have a wide range of political programs, community-supported agriculture programs, food action plans, community garden policies, which are all trying to foster and stimulate food-related projects on the city level. And what we also notice that urban agriculture is a companion of urban development, but it is very much adapted to the local situation regarding crops, regarding business model, regarding distribution channels. And so we still have the feeling that what's happening on the ground, on the level of the municipality, the regional level, it is sort of detached and disconnected from what's happening at EU level, and bringing these two levels together. This is one of our ambitious goals, which we have in EFUA. And so I'm delighted to introduce a couple of speakers who will address these multiple scale levels. I like this food metaphor, which was mentioned by Gianpiero. He outlined the idea of having multiple layers of food policies, the lasagna of food policies. And so I think we will serve you with more lasagna now during this session, but in an international context. And I have the pleasure to introduce Giancarlo Cotella from the Polito in Turin, and he will talk about the several public policies, the planning tools, and the identified key points for successful urban agriculture projects. And so the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You're right. It's difficult to start after lunch, but it's also like we're living, because if you are interested, it's because of me. Like if you are falling asleep, it's digestion. It's not my fault. So that could be a good point, yeah? Okay, so what I talk about today, this one is next and fourth. Okay, so identifying key to success in urban policies and planning tools. We knew today, we had our presentation saying that urban agriculture has a lot of benefits. Yeah, you have this in this little pamphlet here, and that these benefits come from a very big variety of urban agriculture initiatives. And there were so many that we could be the typology. Yeah. And I'm showing you this because you can fetch them from the desk down there. So we know that they are beneficial. We know that there are many different types of urban agriculture, but how can we unlock the potential of these initiatives? Planning and policy tools at the urban level. And I will drive you through the process that we use to individuate keys to successful urban agriculture related public policies and planning tools. And this is a sort of flyer or poster. It's bigger than a flyer, and you can also fetch it down there and like stick it in your office or in the place where you work to diffuse the F1 message. I think thing to do. So, okay, now I start the timing. What do we do? Well, in EFO, we had a work package dedicated to this. It was exactly about an in-depth analysis of urban planning strategies to figure out, well, how urban planning deals with urban agriculture. I speak here as a special planner, not as a person that deals with agriculture. I have a little garden at home, but I'm an academic studying special planning. And I feel the original sin of planning in relation to urban agriculture. In the last 2 centuries, planning has been very much helping to push out agriculture from the city. Frank's presentation was very clear about the fact that agriculture is not an urban function when you talk about spatial planning. Yeah, it's considered a function for some other part of the territory. But when you talk about city, there are much more profitable functions. And just in the last year, we are thinking, okay, let's get agriculture back into the city because we see that people are willing and in need of having agricultural activities. So the point of this activity was how to figure out how to do that. Yeah? So, there was, okay, I think there was another presentation. I don't know if I probably didn't understand. Okay, so what did we do? We tried to identify barriers for urban agriculture in cities. We tried to identify what are the needs expressed by people that do urban agriculture for having urban agriculture interiorized into planning policy tools. And then for an analysis of a number of case studies, we try to figure out what's going on out there. And beware, we are not talking about practices here as case studies, but we're talking about case studies that symbolize, that shows how urban planning and policy tools has taken into account urban agriculture. So we're not talking about bottom-up urban agriculture practice, but how they've been taken into account by urban planning and policies. Yeah, and we had case studies. We had 44 of them. Yeah, 35 in developed countries, 5 in developing countries, 4 in least developed country. You have a map here how they are spread, and in these case studies we have again a big variety, which somehow represent also is symptomatic of the big variety of urban agriculture activities that we find in cities. Yeah, there is a big variety in terms of thematic domain of these policies that deal with urban agriculture. There is a big variety in terms of the instruments that are used, and we will talk about it later. And there is also a variety that separate policies that take into account urban agriculture among many other things. So urban agriculture is a component, sometimes even like implicit. Yeah, it's not explicit focus. And we have policies that are directly focusing on food and urban agriculture. This is just some example. This one is from Yara in Australia. You have Torino community garden, strategic plan for that. We have here a SCOT, which is a planning tool actually of the Nantes area and so on. So we did analyze example like this, and on the basis of this example, what we tried to do was to figure out, and together with also a questionnaire that we distributed to people that do urban agriculture in the practice, what are the failure causes and the barriers for having urban agriculture working effectively, for having agriculture working together as an urban activity. And what we notice is that in relation to the obstacle, the main one is land, is related to land, is land ownership and access to public land to do things. Our colleague from New York mentioned this clearly before. Okay, New York may be a specific case, but still, to get land you can use for developing agricultural activity within cities is difficult, but this is simple to understand because there are other activities that are more profitable for the same plot of land. And then when you talk about planning, for time, this big liaison between planning and developers, yeah? And the idea is, okay, let's develop land, you earn more money instead of just cultivating it. And then, of course, there are also other causes of failure. You can see there, resources, problem in public management, problem in access to water or electricity, lack of participation and lack of urban agricultural forum in the city level, a conflict with land use I just spoke about, lack of support by public policies and so on, ignoring agriculture in the zoning of cities, that's another story, and so on. So we tried to figure out, okay, what is happening in the case study that we analyzed? how is, what type of instruments are actually taking care of urban agriculture, either as a part of it or as the main focus. And we sort of typologized the various case studies that we analyzed. And we figured out that there are various categories of tools that deals in one way or another to urban agriculture. The first one are inventories that either inventorize existing urban agricultural activity or inventorize land opportunities that in the future may be turned to urban agricultural function. Then there are plans. Yeah, this is more easy when you think about planning tools, the plans, but different type of plan. You may have comprehensive strategic plans for cities that may have as one of their axes or measures urban agriculture, or you may have dedicated plan, yeah, for agriculture or more generally for food. Or you may have master plans for little area of the city, more or less little area of the city, that more in detail define urban agriculture aspect in the area. And then, of course, you have regulation. Yeah, how do you intend urban agriculture into zoning? This is a big issue. Yeah, if we take a general regulatory framework of Italy, the zoning for a general regulatory plan, urban agriculture is mostly represented with a letter F and with a perimeter with a white color in it and some specific rules. But this is usually something that you zone outside cities, not within the urban perimeter. So how can you make it more nuanced? Yeah? How can you make urban planning zoning more nuanced in order to somehow interiorize urban agriculture? And then you have other type of regulation. Yeah? Regulation, for instance, for temporary use, for the management of urban agricultural activities, and so on. And then, of course, you have the economic part, the incentives that are very relevant. And you can have incentives financially, like providing support in terms of direct support or tax reliefs. Or you can have technical assistance, how to support people that want to do urban agriculture but don't know how, or not to the full extent, or how you can educate towards urban agriculture. And all these are incentive policies of different kind. And then you have assessment. Yeah, once you have urban agriculture in place, you have to figure out, okay, what is actually happening? What are the benefits? What are the profits? Not only economical. We saw that there are a lot of benefits of urban agriculture, so we don't only want to assess if it makes money or not. So drawing on all these, we identified 9 key messages, 9 key recommendations that could support the interiorization of urban agriculture into public policies and planning activity at the urban level. Of course, this will require a specific audience. This is what we were talking yesterday in the General Assembly. Who is the target for this recommendation? It is only the urban level government, or is it a multi-level activity? Is it a lasagna that we were talking about? Yeah? This is another step. But the message we came up with are the following. The first one is developing a participatory process and establishing the urban agriculture committee at the urban level. Yeah? So putting actors together. And there was this very nice YZ diagram before on how this forum could have more or less decision-making power and be more or less participated by who is involved. Yeah, and of course, involve more actor link, first of all, to knowledge exchanges, cross-fertilization, but also to pre-cooking decision and facilitating, yeah, decision making. Then you have what I mentioned before, ensuring the availability and access to land, and land for urban agriculture. Public land, how you do it? Yeah, you can acquire private properties. Yeah, you can somehow define not only selling, but long-term concession, not only selling and renting, and develop various forms of land acquisition, like taxpayer bonds and so on. Yeah, agriculture into public parks and so on and so forth. Of course, then there is the idea of identifying this land. Is not only to provide land, but you need to figure out what land to provide. Where is it in the city? So there is a need to survey what are the plots and urban farms that are already active or that can be transformed into urban agriculture. So building a database of these areas, yeah, and developing what are called land database, land bank, and so on. And then there is the planning part, more orthodox planning, you know? So creating specific plan for urban agriculture that could be including urban agriculture into overarching or listing planning documents, or having dedicated urban agriculture strategic plan. Defining regulation, this is something that emerged again in many presentations today. When the regulative framework is uncertain, it is difficult for the person that want to do it to start urban agriculture activity because you feel uncertain. You don't know, for instance, what are the rules for the product that you produce for selling them? What are the rules for having access to water? What are the rules for having access to land? And all these issues. It's not about over-regulating, but it's to make regulation clear so that I know the rules of the game, and then I can decide if I want to play the game or not. And then, as I said before, the incentives part, yeah, financial or non-financial incentives, facilities and infrastructure, so to provide the support, for instance, for access to water and electricity, but for access to selling their products for farmer market and so on, to support the rehabilitation of contaminated soil in a way that then it is possible to cultivate them. You cannot pretend, of course, that the people that want to do urban agriculture take care of brownfield regeneration. So there is a need of acting, the public sector to act towards that. Then, as I say, education and support. Yeah, support in technical knowledge, support in culture and cultural facilitation of acceptance of urban agriculture. I'm almost done. I see that you are waiting. And then the part about evaluation and monitoring, in order to be able also to show the results of urban agriculture, to show that there are actually these benefits that we are talking about. Because it's not only about making things clear normatively and technically, but also to creating a narrative that urban agriculture has these actual benefits and that it's good to have it in the city. That's the way you somehow can fight other more powerful interests that have the economic return on their side. That's it. I'm done. And for the discussion, I pose these 3 questions. Do these elements make sense? And you will read more detailed recommendation in the paper. What should be prioritized? Because there are a lot of things and the public administration cannot do everything all at once. So you need to prioritize also time-wise. And maybe if something is missing or has been overlooked. And we would like to hear from your side what.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I think it's quite interesting to see your approach, as we are always tempted to look at the bright side of life and at the benefits of urban agriculture, but to get a better understanding of why things did not work out and what is the main problem for urban agriculture projects is quite interesting in terms of finding like starting points for political support. So I really enjoyed your approach and thanks for these points for discussion. According to my understanding, this session was thought to end with an overall discussion. So I think if there are urgent questions right now, we could maybe take one. Otherwise, I would suggest to keep your message and we will try to get into an overall discussion at the end of this panel. Thanks again. Now we will have Trine Carstensen from the University of Copenhagen, and she will talk a little bit about harnessing EU policies to achieve greater impact on city-level urban agriculture development. Trine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniel. It's there. Yes. I will tell you about an investigation that I did together with my colleague, Rebecca Rudd, on the awareness and impact of EU policies for urban development at the city level. So the background, sorry, I need to do something myself here. The background is that we can see that some cities have already developed urban agriculture supportive policies, but it's less often the case at the regional and the national level, and even less often at the supranational level, such as the EU. So why do we see these missing links in approaches to policy? And even if there are no explicit urban agriculture policies at the moment. There are existing policies and strategies and policy instruments which can be considered of relevance to the practice of urban agriculture in the EU. So, in order to identify these links and reasoning for the missing links, we investigated which policies and policy instruments that are found applicable and relevant from the city level perspective. What are the implementation experience, and how do civil level authorities and other urban agriculture experts assess the impact of relevant EU policies and policy instruments. So we also asked about the potentials and observed benefits and the constraints, and were in search of recommendations to access at multiple levels for better accommodation and nourish of diverse practices of urban agriculture across the European Union. This is not the right presentation. This is the old one. Okay, I continue. Sorry for that. Okay, so we collected data, interview data from 12 cities and 10 European countries with the municipal level authorities and actors engaged in the field of urban development. That could be urban planning experts located at the municipal level and or consultants of the same. And all our respondents were familiar with the state of urban agriculture, and some were also involved in the broader urban greening agendas. And we identified those through the F1 network and via all other urban agriculture relevant EU projects, and also by the conventional snowballing technique. It was a semi-structured approach we had, so we started in a quite open mode without leading as far as possible, in order to get a sense of awareness and recognition of various EU policies and instruments. And then eventually we dug into how these were considered to reach urban agriculture on the ground. So the results are summarized in a report called the Impact Assessment of Existing EU-level Policies of Urban Agriculture Practices and Governance Models. And this report contains a range of different voices, and it's written in a way that we intend to show how this perceived barriers and possibilities as regards EU urban agriculture practices are complex and entangled. And I will now present the 8 key observations and the conclusion of this report. I'm really sorry, because this is not what I intended to present. Okay, the first observation is about the current EU policies, and the respondents we spoke to, they struggle to identify both concrete impacts and concrete potentials for the urban agricultural practices via current EU policy pathways. And this was an important finding, as it was both likely to be an outcome of the currently limited role for urban agriculture in EU policies and policy instruments. The second observation we made was about land ownership and land users. In order to expand the urban agriculture agenda in the EU cities, it's inhibited by urban land ownership and accessibility barriers and competing land uses such as housing development. So if the EU should develop more strongly, if it more strongly recognize the multiple values of urban agriculture, this could support its prioritization at the level of urban governance. Yeah. So the third observation we made regards EU agricultural policies and policy instruments and funding, which somehow continue to favor large-scale agriculture and inhibits the development of urban agriculture. Yet newer EU policy strategies, such as, for instance, the farm-to-fork strategy, despite the focus on large-scale approaches, may still serve as fodder for political negotiation at the city level because of the broader context of concern for climate goals, to which urban agriculture can contribute. So EU funding applies a lot of money, and there was also a wish we identified for smaller amounts targeting small-scale agriculture, where many of the agriculture activities belong. The fourth observation regards urban agriculture as many things, or as a jungle, we also heard yesterday, and it touches upon the many policy areas. And our respondents, they see this as an opportunity, as urban agriculture can fit into a lot of different financing tools at the EU level. But yet greater awareness of this by municipal actors will be essential if the urban agriculture agenda is to spread across the European cities. I had made some nice visuals for all that, so I'm really sorry about my very dull policy slides here. Okay, no matter. The fifth observation regards city networks, which we have heard a lot about this morning, and how they are important for knowledge sharing and capacity building and inspiration, and also for applying EU funding. So city networks across Europe and also beyond, many of these are supported by EU policy and policy instruments, and they appear to be a primary means by which the European Union, even very indirectly, is promoting the urban agriculture agenda in European cities. It was number 6 here. The number 6 observation regards awards. And awards could be, for instance, the Green Capital Award and the Good Practice certificate we heard about this morning. And they can be important for important policy instruments for positive recognition of urban agriculture, and can lead to also tangible impacts. For instance, did the Commission evaluate Sofia as a finalist city for the Green Capital Award and stressed that urban agriculture was an important thing for the city to promote and demonstrate in its action in order to get a fine assessment of this award. So it indicates somehow also that the EU acknowledges urban agriculture as an important practice. But at the same time with these awards, the respondents also were kind of frustrated that these existed because there was a general limited attention they thought about urban agriculture, how it was received attention from the EU currently, and it has implication for its policy based on material support. City networks are good, but also local capacity building is important, and cities need to cultivate their own capacity building to be able to identify the relevant EU policy instruments. And as many of these are not targeting urban agriculture, but disappear in other policy areas with no clear connection to urban agriculture, this is indeed a difficult task. Observation 8, which is my last one, regards distinct groups of urban agriculture practitioners. So finally, it was stressed that there are 2 distinct groups of urban agriculture practitioners: the commercially oriented urban farmers that are more likely to be aware of EU policies and their impacts than the non-commercial EU actors, or urban agriculture actors, I mean. So a straightened and explicit target on urban agriculture could stimulate both urban agriculture groups' awareness of the relations between policy and also relations to projects. So now I'm getting to my conclusion, and I cannot remember how it looks here. I say something and perhaps it's not the same what's written here, but. So in conclusion, we talked about awareness of the urban agricultural linkages. And in our investigation, our respondents flag a variety of EU policy and policy instruments, and that urban agriculture is linked to multiple European Union agendas like the urban resilience, net zero carbon economy, social integration and cohesion, new business opportunity, biodiversity, etc. They also stress when there is a lack of awareness, and a point there was only a little attention towards EU food policies and related instruments and food production projects. So not EU, urban agriculture, I mean, is considered as many things, and it falls between distinct and different policy areas. This is both regarded as a possibility, that it fits into many different policy areas and financing tools, but it's also perceived as a barrier, for instance, when urban agriculture is not sufficient agriculture or rural for the established development program. So EU level policy instruments certainly can help push the agenda of EU, of urban agriculture. And a lot of different existing funding programs is supporting this, both in terms of research and in city network building and in other kind of instruments. So recommendations, yeah. The recommended steps of that our respondents see as available to access at multiple levels for better accommodating and nourishing the diverse urban agriculture practices across European cities. There are different roads, for instance, strengthening the impact and awareness and city level urban agriculture development could take place through an increase in food policy officers in European cities, because now only little attention is directed towards EU food policies and its related instruments. And also a greater municipal participation in EU-funded project seems to be important. It could connect city officials with EU decision makers and make EU policy much more concrete. So what can EU do on the other side? Maintain and increase the support for urban networks is a very important part, and also more funding and support for citizen-driven initiatives. And finally, create some urban agriculture specific EU policy instruments and policies that connect stakeholders and more strongly signal that urban agriculture is valued and important contributions to socio-ecological sustainability, which would ease the work of EU urban agriculture proponents at municipal and also other levels, and we could create a framework in which the urban agriculture agenda may endure for the longer term and survive administrative shifts and other kind of competitive priorities. And I had a very nice ending quote, and I think I'll just read it up because it's not in my slides. And it's from one of our respondents from Rome, saying that the benefits of urban agriculture are so many: on mental and physical health, on job creation, on sustainable development. I like to see urban agriculture play a bigger role in agricultural policies in the EU, and that urban agriculture are tackled from different policy levels and fields. So that was my bit dull and not visualized presentation, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Trine, for your presentation and the according observations. No worries about your presentation. I think we can upload the corrected version afterwards and replace it so it will be accessible to the forum members. Yeah, this idea of providing long-term accessibility to land. I mean, it's not surprising that many problems are land-based in urban agriculture, and existing policies that they still seem to support large-scale farming and overlook the potentials of small spaces. I mean, never underestimate the power of small spaces. So that's a quote that comes to my mind. In this regard, you mentioned the jungle of EU policies, and I think Henk is the expert on it, because you went on a walk through this jungle of existing EU policies, and you will enlighten us in this regard, and we will witness the complexity of agricultural policies at the EU level.
Well, I'm not sure if I will enlighten you, but I will try to be your guide in the jungle of EU policies on urban agriculture. I'm going to explain this a little bit. Okay, good afternoon. Now, I will really follow up on the presentation of Trine, and in a way they're a little bit complementary. Like Trine very much has this way of what do you see from cities if you look at what are EU policies. Well, my focus is much more on EU policies itself. My name is Henk Renting. I am a member of the FUA consortium. I'm the leader of Work Package 5, which is exactly about EU policies. The goal and the title of that work package is Towards European Urban Agriculture Policies and Actions. So I will tell you a little bit about our struggle, our journey to get grips with that topic. The objectives of Work Package 5, which is very much also, I think, building on discussions that we've had before. The aim is to inform the development of EU policies and actions for urban agriculture, but also in ways that optimally use the multiple benefits of urban agriculture. I think it's clear on the basis of the presentations that we have had now how urban agriculture is this very diverse activities which has a lot of multiple benefits. What can we do in terms of policies to really valorize that? A second question, which I think is also a question which has already been addressed and come up in the presentations until now, is the question, how should supranational policy, which of course the EU policy is, how should this relate to other type of policies, or to rephrase it from the perspective of urban agriculture, what is the most appropriate scale level for policies to really optimally valorize and use this potential of urban agriculture? So this is really the question of the link between bottom-up policies that we've already seen a lot, so much dynamics is happening there, so much inspiring and impressive initiatives, but what can we do? What should we do? Complementary, maybe, at the level of nation states or the European Union. So a little bit on the methodological steps that we made in this work packages. We have, in fact, well, we're still in the middle of this because we started a little bit later than the rest. We are making 3 big steps in our activities, in our methodology. The first is to make a mapping of what is there. What do we know about what are relevant policy areas within the European Union for urban agriculture? What are policy instruments that already address urban agriculture? Make a mapping of that. What can we say on the goals and types of instruments that we encounter then? And looking ahead also a little bit, what are policy areas where dynamics are occurring, where maybe there are opportunities? On the basis of this map, we have identified a number of relevant topics, and these we have explored further by means of expert groups, focus groups. We have organized 8 policy talks with the idea to unlock the knowledge and the experience of people knowledgeable in those areas. And we are still going to do something similar also with experiences outside the European Union. We've already had several examples from the United States, but also from countries in the global south, where it's clear that there are very relevant policy experiences where we can also learn from and see what are maybe there the key mechanisms which help understand what are useful policies for urban agriculture. And the last stage, which is going to come the next year, is to formulate a comprehensive vision on urban agriculture in EU policies. and together with that, a number of more specific policy briefs, developing policy practices, maybe even proposals for specific policy areas. So let's see what comes out of this. So what we've been doing, we've been very precise. We've tried to be very precise from the start to map policies based on the, let's say, the infrastructure or the structure of EU policies, how it's used by the EU itself. So the EU has defined a number of thematic areas in which they develop policies in combination with the nation states, and we've been trying to see what are there the relevant policy areas. They more or less correspond to DGs, but not always one-to-one. It's also complicated in the European Union. So we have come out with 5 policy areas where we think they are the most relevant policy areas within EU policy, which are public health, agriculture, I think is obvious, environment, territorial cohesion, and research and innovation. Of course, this is not a complete, how do you call it, exclusive mapping. There are some areas that you might include, for example, the social dimension maybe comes up. You could look into this area of employment, social affairs, and what's the inclusion, I think it's called, in Europe. And also the international dimension could be interesting, maybe what used to be international development and cooperation. I think it's now called international partnerships. But we left them out because if not, it's really also got a little bit too complicated. So what we've been doing is for this area, we have asked experts, we've followed an expert-based methodology to say, okay, what do you know about what are existing relevant areas where urban agriculture is addressed in the objectives or in the instruments, and can you describe what the instruments are? So what we've come up, and to be honest, why didn't it work? Yeah. To be honest, this has been a little bit disappointing for us that in fact urban agriculture is often not so much addressed within European policies. Here you see the map that we have been able to make on of existing policy instruments within these thematic areas and sub-areas. You see within territorial cohesion, the territorial cooperation and also urban development emerge. And these below programs are the instruments where we can really see that something is happening, that something related to urban agriculture is mentioned, which is the action plan on childhood obesity, where there is a mentioning of school gardening. The new CAP, where urban agriculture as such is generally not mentioned, but there are some national strategic programs that mention something similar to, related to urban agriculture. A number of territorial schemes, especially the URBACT scheme and the European Urban Innovation Actions, where there are a number of actions really funded on urban agriculture, and also Horizon 2020. We have already seen here a number of projects which also address urban agriculture, which also link cities in different ways. So here there is also a policy, no, it's not an explicit policy on urban agriculture, but urban agriculture emerges. If you start looking at what are the type of instruments that we can see they're never really like a full regulation or a legislative framework in which urban agriculture is mentioned. We talk about action plans, we sometimes talk about funding programs, exchange and learning programs, and what is most striking is that never explicitly in the objectives the term urban agriculture is mentioned. What is mentioned in these occasions, in these programs, is a form of urban agriculture, which could be It could be school gardens, it could be community gardens. This is the type of level that urban agriculture appears when it does appear. So, based on this mapping of the existing situation, to be honest, this really has been quite disappointing for us, and we made the conclusion that urban agriculture at EU level is still highly neglected, and that this is never explicitly addressed. If it's addressed, then it's addressed indirectly. Also, we see that the policy instruments that do exist are very fragmented. There is no overall idea on a kind of urban agriculture that we want to develop, or a kind of comprehensive vision on what should be the role of urban agriculture in future food systems. And this illustrates a little bit this gap that we have already seen between policies and the existing realities. But at the same time, and maybe now we come a little bit to the positive part, is that on another level we do see urban agriculture. I call this the invisibility and the visibility at the same time of urban agriculture in European policies. These are snapshots from a video on the Farm to Fork. Well, we see here a lot of situations which obviously we recognize as urban agriculture. So the narrative, the image of what type of future food system do we want, it does implicitly cover urban agriculture. But if we start looking at proposals of the Farm to Fork, for example, it is never explicitly mentioned. Well, I think this is emblematic a little bit for the situation where we are. We've also made a policy map. This is where we're working on now, which shows, well, which is expanded, as you can see, and which also includes areas where we do think that there are important policy opportunities to go ahead. You see a number of other policy areas emerging, for example, under environment, the Environmental Action Plan and the Circular Economy Action Plan, also some new measures within the CAP. But most important is the triangle on the top, which we have put there to visualize a number of initiatives within EU policy to come to more integrated policies, where the Farm to Fork strategy is one of the expressions, which is not just agriculture, but it's also climate, it's also health. There are more of these policy strategies like the green infrastructure strategy, the soil strategy, that try to go towards this type of integration. I'm looking now at Daniel, and do you still give me time for introducing a number of points for discussion?
We can keep this for the discussion.
That's okay. I can come back to that. It doesn't work anymore?
Okay.
Oh.
Hank, thank you so much. I think
Yeah.
you enlightened us and we understand the complexity.
I'm not sure if I enlightened people.
Policies at EU level, and we got a pretty good overview why it is so difficult to implement urban agriculture at EU level. And I mean, we had the policy talks. This would have been the lessons and insights. But on the other hand, this is still analytical work, and I think it's also quite obvious why urban agriculture as a technical term would fall in between of these existing jurisdictions, while looking through the lens 2030 and the Sustainable Food System Partnership. And yeah, her expertise is really in community-based agriculture. And Daniela, are you online? Are you connected? Hello, good afternoon.
You can see me, I see, and can you hear me too?
Yes?
Wonderful, great. I missed the kind of the bridge between the last presentation and now, but I see it's my spot. So I'm really glad to be here and present you a bit of an overview on how Food 2030, so open food system transformation from the Food 2030 perspective, and the Sustainable Food Systems Partnership really link to the topics you have discussed today. And I will start with sharing my screen. And hope you can see it now. I see on the screen it's still only me, but I shared the presentation, so if that could be fixed, so you also see what I'm talking about within the next 10 to 12 minutes. Until that is fixed, I can already give you a bit of an introduction maybe. So I think we heard a lot today also in terms of urban agriculture, how it's linked to urban resilience, for example, and also we talked about other European political initiatives. I think we're all very aware of where we are standing in terms of challenges when it comes to crossing planetary boundaries in many ways, and also the new geopolitics we are faced with. So transitioning towards a resilient and sustainable food systems has become more important than ever. And I want to give you a bit of a linkage to how changing these complex systems, how science and evidence-based assessments have become more important than ever. I believe we cannot see the presentation yet.
Yeah, sorry, we cannot see your screen here.
Okay, but I also send it. Maybe someone can share it from there.
Now something is happening.
Something is happening, that's
Yeah.
good.
But
I think it's only a black screen so far, right? Maybe I share
we are
again.
viewing the screen share seems to be active, but we still cannot see the presentation. No, now we can see it.
Wonderful.
If you go to
Okay,
presenter
great.
mode, hopefully everything will work.
Yes. It is in presenter mode. Let me see. Here we are. Great.
Yeah.
Sorry for that.
Perfect.
Good. I move ahead, so I want to give you really a brief overview. I see the slide is not moving. Here we are. Good. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I think you're all very well aware of the European Green Deal, really #1 priority when it comes to also linking to urban food system transformation, here with the overarching goal of a climate neutral Europe by 2050. To really protect and restore the EU's natural capital, but as well also to protect health and well-being of citizens. And I think in the previous presentations, we heard about the linkage to mental and physical health also, and also about resilience, while ensuring that no one is left behind. I also really appreciated the linkages to inclusiveness overall. And I also research and innovation is really here an enabler of the Green Deal transitions, with this project of the conference, of course, being a Horizon 2020 project. And we are really in a critical moment of transition where science is shifting from an observer to be an actor, and really to move from research to policy. And the farm to fork strategy here very present, and especially with a couple of actions, and this is more as a reference. So we have the farm to fork strategy. It will become a framework legislation on Union sustainable food systems foreseen end of this year. after a public open consultation, but a lot of other actions already happened and will happen that are connected to that. One, for example, is the responsible code of conduct, where businesses can subscribe voluntarily to these actions, which has already been initiated in 2022, and a couple of other actions that will come. And now within this broader framework, we have Food 2030. And for those who are not so aware of it, Food 2030, it is really an R&I policy framework for future-proofing our food systems. And it supports the transition to a healthy planet, and was developed in 2016, so before the Farm to Fork strategy, but fully subscribes to it. And it's really about how we think and do R&I, with whom, so really in an interdisciplinary, inclusive, multi-actor approach. On what? So finding in a system where we have really huge challenges, finding the right leverage points, and then of course forward. And the focus is really on impact-driven research and innovation. At the beginning this morning, we heard also about this project to really define the impact by the end of it, and that is kind of one of the main aspects that will be taken care of. So I really love that aspect also. And here we in Food 2030, the idea is to look at it holistically. And I think when thinking about urban agriculture, many of these things have been mentioned. So on the one hand, it's nutrition for sustainable and healthy diets, but at the same time, it needs to be done in a climate smart and environmentally sustainable way. Circularity needs to be taken into account, and resource efficiency, and then very important, innovation through empowerment of communities. And how do we leverage that? We do that by 10 action pathways. So to thematically work on those, and you will find in Horizon 2020, but also now in Horizon Europe, in the current 23 and 24 work program, really projects linked to each of these pathways. And we will update those pathways in light of the next strategic plan that will define Horizon Europe from 25 to 27. And there will also be an updated report and the Food 2030 conference in Brussels on the 4th and 5th of December. You have at the end of the presentation, you have a mailing list, a stakeholder list, where I really invite you to subscribe so you get invites and inspiration linked to food system transformation. Now, one of the pathways is urban food systems, and not to go too much into detail, but give you a bit of an overview, the challenges and at the same time the potential is really linked also what we heard quite a bit today. We have rising urban population, change of lifestyle, but at the same time, their inhabitants represent an essential leverage point for change. You change something there, you really change something on a bigger scale. And the goal here of this pathway is really also increasing urban sustainability and well-being. And the R&I needs we look at from the Food 2030 perspective is really establishing holistic food system governance capacity. And there, of course, all elements fit in, also such as urban agriculture, to develop synergies and also increase the connection meaningfully across the rural-urban interface. So also to identify what is better placed in rural areas and vice versa, and how can both really work together. And at the same time, of course, foster local food systems entrepreneurship. We heard about incentives, the right incentives, financial tools also of urban agriculture. And then very much linked to urban agriculture, use urban and spatial planning to really reinforce urban food system transformation, as we also really believe urban planning, spatial planning is very, very important in really driving change. And as an inspiration, just to throw out a few publications we had so far that are linked to it, and really encourage you to have a look. There's a lot of food for thought in it, and many of those are also really linked to the urban interface. And one will come now in May. On the left-hand side, you see this slight green text box, Urban Food System Transformation in the Context of Food 2030, Current Practice and Outlook Towards 2030. What we have done here is we did a workshop last year with more than 20 Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe projects, and also conducted a survey and had deep dive interviews. And I'm very glad that you were also joining for contributing. And we discussed what works well, what can be improved, but also asking for inspiration and lessons learned to share best practice for cities who wish to transform their food systems in different ways. And at the same time, also ask projects, what do you need or what do you see as the main needs for next RNI activities, also in light of the next strategic plan? So once the publication is out, once you're on the mailing list, of course, you will get informed about that also, which really gives a holistic overview. As my last point within the last 2 minutes, I want to show you or give you an overview of the partnership. The partnership is one element of Horizon Europe. We have 49 partnerships to drive the green and digital transition. And just to show you a few here, no need to read them out all, but they have different thematics. And it's really a new way of working in a multi-stakeholder approach. And the main driver for setting up these partnerships is to make the various RNI performing actors cooperate across the European borders. And of course, to speed up the research and innovation activities, because when you have the partnership, you have a different weight to carry out activities also for a longer time frame, 7 to 10 years. And accordingly, of course, have more leverage point for activities. So each partnership will also have a work program accordingly. And I just want to show you a bit the scope of the Sustainable Food Systems Partnership, and really invite you, especially if you look at the web page here on the right-hand side, Food Pass, that is a project, a preparatory action for the partnership to come to life. Calls of the partnership have been closed, and we expect the partnership to launch end of this year. But you can already have a look at what is the partnership foreseeing, and really invite you to engage and connect with the partnership, because of course partnership activities also need to be in line with all Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe activities. And the partnership really tries to achieve nothing less than, and I go clockwise and I start at 1 o'clock, change the way we process and supply food, change the way we connect with food systems, so citizen engagement, consumer trust, and here, of course, also place-based solutions have a very big role. Also the role of living labs connected to different activities will play a crucial element. Change the way we govern food systems. So we talked a lot also today about city level governance, for example. This is will also be one aspect. And lastly, change the way we eat connected to nutrition. So really invite you to have a look at those. There was a run through of activities that we believe is relevant for today. And I hand back to the panel, and looking forward to the discussion. Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Daniela, for this interesting presentation. I just became aware of the fact of how comprehensive and overarching this whole Food 2030 research strategy actually is. And what I found quite interesting is that you are also looking to achieve this co-benefits. So again, this idea of creating benefits is resonating within our work. I think in urban agriculture, we are still thinking more in a spatial context, while this Food 2030 research approach is more this systemic thinking, but I still see a lot of synergies. So we are happy to be under this umbrella of the Commission and to get your support. Regarding the time, I would suggest to immediately hop from Brussels to the Big Apple. Nevin Cohen will go on with the... he's not online. Okay. Okay, yeah, maybe it's a pity that he's not online because he would have talked about urban agriculture policy lessons from New York and the United States. But I mean, regarding the timeline, we can consider it as some sort of relief. And so, yeah, let's go on with Guido Santini, Food for Cities program, project officer at the FAO, and you will talk about the urban and peri-urban source book, which was released last year, I think, from production to food systems. Thanks for being here, Board of Innovation member. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Daniel. So if Nevin is not here, maybe I have double time to present? No. No, I'd like to give a bit of context. Now, this is a publication that we have launched last year and somehow summarizes a bit the vision of FAO on urban agriculture. And first of all, what is the... Okay. No, this is the pointer. Okay. No, I think this is not the right presentation. Anyway, I wanted to give a bit of context, but apparently there is the old presentation, so I will jump into the source book. First of all, why we have decided to invest and to join the efforts with other organizations like RUAF and Ricolto and Ryerson University to work on this book. As I mentioned this morning, there is an increasing demand from governments, local and national governments, to receive support on promoting urban agriculture. And okay, something is lost here. Okay, and another point that there is a huge amount of information on urban agriculture, a lot of case study, lots of experience. Okay, this is the good one then, okay. So I wanted to give a bit of background, no, on challenges and trends that the world is facing, no, and which FAO is very concerned about. Of course, the increase of population, urban population, that is quite dramatic, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And as you know, 2/3 of the world population is expecting to be in urban areas in 2050. The world also, so the urban context is already presenting a quite significant scenario. 2/3 of the total food supply, global food supply, is already consumed by cities, and this figure is dramatically increasing in the next decades. Same as global waste and also energy consumption. Urbanization also implies poverty and slum concentration of people living in slums. As you can see also in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia, the scenario is quite dramatic. But also urbanization brings different types of malnutrition, not only undernutrition, but also change in diets, consumption of animal proteins, and also increase of obesity, not only in the global north, but also in developing countries. And also, the world is facing a lot of challenges, especially in these recent years, from the increasing climate crisis, but also the COVID pandemic and the consequences of the Ukrainian war that have somehow threatened the reliability and the affordability of global food systems. And governments have started to need a support in relocalizing food production and local food systems. Okay, no. Again, I'm going back to the purpose of the source book, and after giving a bit of context. So what we have tried to do is to really respond to a number of questions, no? From the typologies that this morning we discussed about, the challenges, the conditions and the requirements to implement urban agriculture in different contexts, and also the policy instruments that have to go with implementation of urban agriculture. And the first question that we try to address in this publication is also to define urban agriculture and to reconcile the different definitions. We have a lot of diversity in the way we interpret and define urban agriculture, and what we try to do is really to try to harmonize the definition and simplify it. Of course, we have to keep in mind that this publication was targeting practitioners and urban decision makers, not an academic arena like this one, where we are allowed to have speculations and debate on terminologies, but we really needed to try to simplify and make it more a pragmatic approach to urban agriculture. And of course, one aspect that we focused on is to also consider urban and peri-urban agriculture, which is somehow very different from the rural traditional food supply. Also, what we try to understand and define is also the typologies based on the different criteria that defines agriculture, urban agriculture, from the location, the typology of production, the main objectives and scope of the production, the level of ownership and tenure, the scale, the individual and collective modalities, and so on and so forth. So some figures on urban agriculture. Urban agriculture is already an important reality, as we discussed over the morning. There is unfortunately, there are not official data on the number of urban farmers, but there are some estimates. An old estimate coming from the late 90s that almost 1 billion people are involved in urban agriculture, but there are more recent estimates, no? And a recent study that was launched 5-6 years ago tried to, using remote sensing information, try to define and assess the land occupied by urban agriculture, but also the people involved in urban agriculture. And there is an estimation that more than 200 million households in a global level are involved in urban crop production. And an important data is also that the majority of the crops produced, irrigated crops, are within a radius of 60 kilometers of cities. Yeah. So typologies. We discussed about typologies, and we also made a big effort to try to simplify these typologies, and also with the idea of meeting the needs of decision makers and practitioners at local level. And we simplified the categories into 4 mainly, no? The home-based gardening, the typical household gardening, mainly focusing on subsistence. The community-based collective systems. The commercial farming, this is a very broad category that includes individual small households up to large farms that are mainly in peri-urban areas. And then the institutional food growing, the schools, the hospitals, all the public mechanisms to promote urban agriculture. So I'm not, would like to quickly go through the multiple scope and benefits. We discussed quite a lot today about that, so no need to go back to that. But of course, one important remark is that urban agriculture is not only producing food. It could not only be seen like this. Unless we approach it through its multiple benefits, it will always be a competition with the rural agriculture. So, of course, we also have to look at the implications and the challenges. And I'm also looking at that from the angle of a global organization like FAO and our main clients that are developing countries, no? And the main problem that we always face is that urban agriculture is not sufficiently recognized in policies and in land use plans and urban plans. And it's still too based on informality, and of course it's an important element of the informal economy, but this creates a lot of challenges in terms of unregulated way of using pesticides, for example, or using wastewater. And of course, the issue related to access to land and tenure, which is often based on customary laws that are somehow prevent farmers to be recognized in formal processes. Okay, the source book is organized in this as follows. So we have collected more than 200 examples at global level. We have developed 6 in-depth case studies from Europe to Africa, Asia, and Latin America. We have analyzed, as I mentioned, the typologies and the typology of practices that are somehow linked to the different typologies, challenges, and also the mechanisms to support. So how governments, how individuals can support implementation of urban agriculture through water management, land use planning, access to credit and extension services, and also mechanisms like procurements. And of course, we also focused a lot on what are the enabling environment, what is the enabling environment, what are the enabling conditions to support urban agriculture, from governance and multi-stakeholder engagement, planning. So the publication is available in our webpage. So unfortunately, I don't have copies here, but you can download them. So you have the main report and also the 6 case studies. And of course, we are also developing a repository and a database on with the different case studies that we have collected, trying to catalog them according to different criteria. And this will be soon available in our website. And something to conclude, one aspect that I would like to really emphasize is the need to integrate more systematically urban agriculture in urban planning processes and land use planning. The issue of securing access to land, which is quite a critical issue in many developing countries. The importance of contextualize urban agriculture in a food system context, in a city region food system. So urban agriculture can be an important way to connect, of course, different actors in the food system across urban and rural areas. And of course, the governance is a key element to facilitate this. Last point that I would like to mention is also related to what Giancarlo said, is the lack of reliable information and monitoring of urban agriculture programs and projects. I mean, this is quite an issue. Urban agriculture is still ignored by the official data collection and statistical census, and this can also be an impediment to really understand the contribution of urban agriculture to the different functions, and also to attract more investments from national governments, for example. So I stop here, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Guido, for this interesting presentation and for broadening our view and for bringing this global perspective to the table. I still think this was something that we had been missing. Unfortunately, Nevin Cohen, he's not connecting, so we are perfectly in time, and we can immediately get into a discussion. Maybe I would like to ask a first question. Is Daniela still available? Because what Guido emphasized was, again, this feeling that we already had. The benefits of urban agriculture are not recognized. They are partly invisible. They are under the radar of the official policy makers. And we are also lacking reliable information about urban agriculture in general. I mean, I'm happy that our benefits matrix, the typology, it is actually based on empirical data we have collected. So I think we are partly addressing this problem by collecting data on our own, but obviously we do not have the capacity to do this on a global level. But this is still, nevertheless, a very interesting observation from your side. Daniela, are you connected?
Yes, I'm connected.
Perfect.
I'm not sure what exactly the question is, if I should respond to
No,
agree
I,
to
I-
the...
I want to come up with this question now
Okay,
because
wonderful.
I think you've seen that, yeah, a lot is happening on the level of the city, the municipality, the region. I think we had very good contributions in this session, and during our preparatory meeting, you already emphasized that urban agriculture is something that is yeah, mainly addressed by DG Agri. So my question would be, what is your recommendation? What's a promising way to try to reconnect the local, the regional scale of urban agriculture to EU policies? How could we address policymakers in Brussels, and how could we really make the benefits visible? Do you have a good recommendation and approach, something that could be a fruitful way of doing this?
Very good question. I think the project, in terms of what was mentioned this morning, in terms of showing really, making a really thorough impact assessment and showing the impact of urban agriculture, I think that's very important to show what is the added value and the added benefit. And we heard today a lot about many connected benefits in terms of urban resilience, biodiversity, for example. I think that is a really good case, and also really ask the cities to come forward and show best practice. I can say that from food policies or food councils on the city level, once we see really good examples there and cases there, that really helps to make a strong case, and also really encourage to look at it from the food systems lens, so in an overarching perspective. So we had how to connect it, for example, also with education. It could be connected with local procurement, for example. There is a Green Deal call on school food for change, for example, on school procurement. So to connect the dots to other initiatives, I think could be really helpful.
Thank you very much. I see that Hank and Giancarlo are already standing up, so I assume you have questions or comments.
I would like to follow up what your question was also to Daniela, and I mean, I think what you exposed about the Food 2030 approach, also about the farm to fork approach, it's very pertinent, and it's very good and important context for the development of urban agriculture. But at the same time, I also see that also here, urban agriculture is not explicitly there. So that is all the time, I think, a little bit the struggle. What is the point where to articulate the multiple benefits, the link with food systems? I think we completely share all that, but where would be the entry point to link that explicitly with urban agriculture? I don't know if you have an answer.
I believe that was a question to me. I don't think I have the perfect answer for that, unfortunately. But what I can say is that the results of Horizon 2020 and also now New Horizon Europe projects they will be very carefully looked at in terms of feedback to policy. So what you find with the main recommendations you see in these projects, such as this, will be really considered for the future, and we look at it carefully, and also really to make sure to carry that further, and also to discuss with projects together how to replicate good practice and how to scale. That's all I can mention for now. I hope that helps a bit, even if it's not a full answer for now.
Thank you so much, Daniela. And luckily, we do not need the answer right now. We have time until 2024 in IFUA, but we promise we will come to Brussels ready for action. So we will ask this question again. Giancarlo now wants to ask something.
It's mostly a comment because I was enlightened by Guido's presentation when he talked about this systemic perspective that we need to adopt at the city regional level. I think it's very relevant because what I notice in this discussion, as I said, I'm not an expert of urban agriculture, but on planning. What I see from the discussion in these days is that when we talk about urban agriculture, we're not talking about agriculture as the scope of something, as a goal. We're talking about agriculture as a mean for something. All the benefits that we were talking about, like prevent obesity for children or providing aggregation of community, many things, but it's not, agriculture is not the goal. That's the feeling I have. While if you think about it in a transcalar city regional system, then you can differentiate the goal for which agricultural is. And I think this is key, in my opinion. But to make it is not like, to make this, I think you need to identify an entry point of what will be, I wouldn't say a privileged scale, but a scale that could act as a catalyst. Like regional level, we know, for instance, in Italy, the money are there. Yeah, money from European Union, they get to the regions, they are operationalized there. But maybe the scale to territorialize them could be the city regional scale, which would be, in our case, the metropolitan city, or metropole in France, or the policy boundary of the ITI in Poland, and so on. That's basically what we can call a functional food region, something like that. And there are tools at the European level for dealing with these functional areas. And we have integrated territorial investment that have been used for that, not for urban agriculture, but for dealing with functional area. And we have community-led local development that can be used for that. So I think that the tools may be there, but they're not used for agriculture and urban agriculture. Agriculture is segregated in silos, as it stands. So probably it's just about addressing and touching the right leverage and saying, okay, you have the means, but use them.
Thank you very much. I think this is more of a statement than a question. Yeah, I think Henk wants to come up with a follow-up message. Otherwise, I would also...
Yeah, it's partly a follow-up because the same isolation is also from the side of agriculture. Agriculture is automatically considered rural agriculture and not urban agriculture. What you also see in the terms of policy. I mean, we are now having a discussion, should we have specific policies for urban agriculture? Maybe that is not even the question. Maybe we should just have policies for agriculture, but which is also applicable in urban areas, which is now the problem because a lot of the CAP measures, they are not applicable in urban areas. Similarly, also to what Henry was saying from the start, we don't look at what is the result and the contribution to policy aims of the activity, but we already say on the basis of the type of activity or on the basis of the location of the activity, if policies are applicable or not. So maybe we should just have agricultural policy for everywhere.
Thanks for this comment. Brings us back to the question, do we really need to distinguish between urban and rural agriculture? Does this make sense in the 21st century? I mean, the numbers that you presented in your presentation, 800 million people involved in UPA, this is like amazing, yeah. So, yeah, it's an estimate. So, okay, but I think you also want to add another comment.
Just to react on what Giancarlo said regarding the transcalar approach, which I think it's very important, no? But at the same time, when we talk about city region food system, the scale depends a lot on where the food comes from, the food flows. and often doesn't really coincide with the jurisdictional boundary. So, but of course, to operationalize this approach, you need to start from jurisdiction, and this is what we have tried to do in the countries that we have operationalized the city region food system approach. So, of course, it's a compromise, but at least it reflects to some extent the reality, and it allows to involve decision makers and in this context. Otherwise, it remains only conceptual. And maybe we can discuss it bilaterally.
We are already over timing a little bit, but I would like to take one or two questions, comments from the audience, if there are any.
Just a very short conclusion, listening to the presentation of all of you. What is missing, in my opinion, is more dialogue between the organizations such as FAO, Food Organization, and the European Union, for example, because we have achieved many results, but the cooperation between different organizations, I have the impression is missing, because we really need to go ahead, because every organization has achieved many results. Now it's time to dialogue, to go ahead and to obtain new results.
I mean, technically, this underlines the necessity of having a European Forum for Urban Agriculture, for better networking between different stakeholders. So, luckily, we are in the middle of the IFUA Forum. Any other questions, comments from the group? Okay. Daniela, is there a last comment, statement from your side?
I know, just many thanks for giving us also the opportunity to present a bit from the perspective really on urban food system transformation with urban agriculture, of course being one application of it. So really glad about that, and really happy to hear all these inspirations and really what has happened. That doesn't mean there is nothing to do anymore, but as you also just mentioned, such a problem to discuss jointly is really a perfect opportunity to take things further. Many thanks.
Okay, thank you so much for being with us. We promised a lot food for thought, and lasagna you got served, so it's now time for the coffee break. Thanks for being here.